903.
The Migo and Yuggoth with ASG and Dave. Zac on Fritz Lang and DB gets weird with Rodney Anonymous this month on the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos.
Brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Why not get a pair of Dino sound slippers this summer? You know, just in time for autumn. Fuzzy, dinosaur-looking feet that make a roaring sound every couple of steps. BunnySlippers.com. Edited by Daniel Spitzer. In-studio audio by Sara and Daniel Spitzer. Dave's Corner is by Dave Heath. Visit him at davescorneroftheuniverse.wordpress.com.
Music by Kevin MacLeod. Help the show by sharing, rating, liking, or 5-star giving wherever you listen to or rate podcasts.
Want to help the show be twice a month? Support the show by hitting the Patreon button on PGttCM.podbean.com or by going to paypal.me/PGttCM. Buy a cool shirt from PGttCM.threadless.com. PGttCM is part of the Dark Myths Collective.
And don't forget to visit PGttCM.com and check out our new podcast, Welcome to Portland, and find out how you can be a guest on it.
Recorded at Badger's Drift Studio in beautiful North Portland. So today we have a pretty big show.
Lots of different people coming on and sharing their opinions and ideas.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, no. This is pretty cool. We've got Dave from Dave's Corner of the Universe. We've got Rodney Anonymous from The Dead Milkman.
Oh my gosh, I'm fangirling out about that one.
Yeah. we also have Adam Scott Glancy, a.k.a. A. Scott Glancy.
Yeah.
One of the big guys with Pagan Press and Delta Green, so that's super cool. He's going to be talking about the Mego. And then we've also got Zack Ferguson.
All the way from England.
Yeah, Brighton, England, talking about... He wanted to talk about cinema, so I said, hey, yeah, let's talk about cinema.
He is very well informed. He's an informed guy.
Yeah.
He knows some stuff. He's always fun to talk to.
Well, he's one of those guys like me who's like, you know what? Someone made a reference to something. I need to find out what that is. I will look up everything.
Yeah, it's a deep diver, which is always fun to talk to for me because I like to get... I am a broad diver, so I like to get a little bit from all the deep divers.
Okay.
That's nice. What's interesting to me about this episode is that everybody on it has an expertise in this subject. It's like either through personal exploration or professional interest. And like I personally think your skill in bringing them all together was pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's what I'm trying to do with The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos.
I know.
Especially now that we have better equipment. It's,
you
know.
Yeah, we can really, like, hear people from other places, and you can, you know, like, sound quality them up, regardless of what their recording equipment is like, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, I think it's really cool to hear this network talking to itself, talking to each other.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the major points of what I have been trying to accomplish with The People's Guide.
And you're getting there.
Yeah, I'm getting there. So, hey. So, yeah, no. I mean, one of the main things I wanted with The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos is, like, I went to CthulhuCon 2015, and there was all these people who I had heard on various podcasts all at the same place talking about the same thing, and it was amazing. And I've always wanted to have something that's kind of akin to that, maybe, but maybe kind of like everyone gets a little bit more table time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and like, like with this kind of format, you know, you can give somebody, you know, 30 minutes to talk about whatever they want to. Listening to Dave's Corner of the Universe was really interesting for me because it really brought out all this stuff I'd never even thought about the Mego. You know, and it was just like, we watched the movie of the Mego.
Whisper in Darkness.
Thank you, Whisper in Darkness, with the wax cylinders, which was so cool to see.
Sure.
And that was really fun, and it was really interesting. And like the whole thing about this guy is getting these mysterious letters, and somebody's gonna prove it to him, and then
Yeah.
they do, and then they're like, actually, I want all of that proof back, thank you. and it was like, that's suspicious, because when do you ever hear about somebody who's like really gonna prove a conspiracy wanting all their proof back? Like, never.
Yeah, that's like
Yeah.
red flag city.
Red flag city, exactly. And it was just like, it was a good story, which I have to say is not always the case with HP. But this one was a good story. It was really intriguing. And the whole thing with it being like, like it felt like a conspiracy, and it felt like, like the Mego are like working behind the behind the scenes. And that was something I liked about what Dave said about the Mego being a sort of like human-sized monster,
Yeah.
rather than being like what are you going to do about Cthulhu? You can do nothing about Cthulhu. Cthulhu is or it isn't, whatever. And many other of the like creatures and gods in the mythos are like that, but the Mego are a human-sized problem. Like, if we knew about them, we could take care of them. We've got weapons that could hurt them. But instead, we don't know about them, and the conspiracy lives on, and our brains yet again get transported in tin cans across space.
You talk about what Dave's talking about, and just wait till you hear what Adam Scott Glancy talks about with the Mego, because we discussed the Mego in length, and I ask him, what's the best way to take care of them, and no, I mean, here's someone who knows what they're talking about when they're talking. Is the guy who wrote all the cool stuff in Delta Green.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, can I share with you a kind of a punny joke I've been workshopping?
Sure, go for it.
Hola, amigo. Are you a fun guy?
Oh, yeah. No one's ever done that one.
Oh, I'm sure, right?
Let's get going with our first part.
Okay.
And that is, we're going to be talking or listening to Zach talk about Fritz Lang. So this is Zach on cinema, but then end up being Zach on literature. That's what we're calling this section.
Okay.
Zach on cinema, then it ends up becoming Zach on literature.
So could we call it Zach on literary cinema?
Nope.
Or Zach on cinematographic literature?
Nope.
So we can't combine them. It's just the two, and they meld in the middle.
Kind of.
Okay.
It's great to be here with you.
Good. So I think we're going to talk about some silent film there.
Yes.
You were talking about your love of silent cinema. Something that I've talked about in the past with my love of silent cinema, particularly Fritz Lang.
Oh, the master. Yes, Fritz Lang. I've always loved his works. I have always gravitated towards his films. There was a point in time where I think the gravitation towards it was more to that. Oh, hey man, guess what? I'm like some pretentious like film viewer, like the cinema of Fritz Lang and F.W. Murnau, and it's like I approached it just so I could tick list it off a list. So if there is passing conversation, you're like, well, guess what? I like Fritz Lang. And then as you mature, you kind of gravitate towards that cinema, and it really it takes on a whole new plethora of meaning for you. And I've really like fallen back in love with silent cinema recently, and most definitely within the early Fritz Lang career stage, not to take anything away from his noir crime American releases, but just his early works like The Moody Todd, Destiny, Dr. Mabuse, which for me is pure cinema, and that film for me is emblematic of cinema done right, and also in a time where it wasn't a talkie, in a time where visual storytelling is the be all end all. And I absolutely love Dr. Mabuse. his follow-up to that was his 5-hour epic. Now, Dr. Mebus Dispieler, there's so, I believe there's 3 of them, and I think the third one, released in the 60s, is the only one I haven't watched at the moment.
Oh, like the
It's the only one I
Thousand
haven't
Eyes
watched.
of Dr. Mabuse.
Yes.
Mabuse.
Is it Mabuse? That sounds much better.
It's supposed to sound like my abuse in French, so my French is awful. So.
my accent, mine's like Cockney slang. Dr. Meb. Boosh, yeah, my boosh, yeah. I remember when I remember when I pronounced Godot as Godot when I was in drama, and my drama teacher was like, "Is there any specific reason that you're not pronouncing this right?" And I was like, "I don't know. It just sounds better. Godot." He went, "It's Godot." I'm like, "No, waiting for Godot." It's like, "No, Godot." And I think that's why my drama teacher downgraded me. But no, it's what is it? Dinubelungen? His 5-hour epic is the only one that I've got anything very negative to say about. But everything, I had great issue of re-experiencing that film. It was watching Dinubelungen. I just sat there and I felt that it was an emblem of the constraints of silent cinema. It really showed. If you sat down a class and asked them to watch it, not to study it per se, but just to enjoy it on a cinematic experience, I think the majority of the class will be hanging from the raft. It is very beautiful, but it's to do with the characters and it's to do with the performances. Like, everything is heightened to almost a pantomime degree. There's too much broad brush strokes in that film, because there's a subtlety with Dr. Mebus where the performances are understated, but when they are elevated and they are broad and they are out there, it's very much of a fashion to fall into the schemata of what the character himself is doing, all these various guises. So when I watched this 5-hour epic fantasy, I felt that the performances were so overt, you know, the back of the hand on the brow, the swooning, and it was 5 hours of that dotted with a few segmentations of beautiful sets and artistry. But I just felt like this is the emblem of the issue with silent cinema. You are pushing way beyond your limits, beyond your capabilities. We know that the cameras they used were quite, affixed. You couldn't be as broad and as swooping. But then there's a contrariness to that, because with Dr. Mebus, the camera angles, the movement of camera, using the camera as an almost third person. So when I kind of watched Dinubelungen, I was like, 5 hours, yes, it's an epic length, it's an epic runtime. It does not, runtime does not approximate epicness in my eye. It's how you handle it, and I just thought it was so broadly performed, and I just thought it was boring, and I felt that even the pretensions that a lot of critics over the years have imbued it with, and this is what you find with any piece of artistry, with essayists, professors, they imbue it with their take, and as it evolves, there's a history behind these sequences, these factions, the socio-political climax at the times. But I kind of watched it and I kind of felt those essayists are imbuing this with a history and an almost meta mythology, because it is a pretty bare bones movie. So I had a really tough time re-experiencing that one a couple of weeks ago. But then following on from there, you have Metropolis, which, is the greatest science fiction, allegorical story for industrialism and the coming war. And it's just then transitioning on and through. I feel like a lot of what Fritz Lang does, it's, you see between films, him taking it upon himself to say, okay, I'm gonna shift and change genre, but he's never got away from Dr. Mebus, because there's a thing with Mebus, and it's related to M, and it's also related to his later American films. It's that almost Pope psychosexual, psychosomatical type thing that, with everything else dotted in between, it is quite easy to cast them off, because people got to realise it was an industry that was run like a Reich in itself, with like Goebbels behind, and even before the constraints of World War, there was a German cinema had to be emblematic. It had to have a meaning behind their politics. And I think with his crime films and the Mabuse films. That was him working at the peak of the thematics and content that I think really appealed to him.
Yeah.
And that's where he found the gravitation to Hollywood, because when he went to Hollywood, that was all they were making. That's all that they were putting out there. Espionage, socio-political, World War affected thrillers. It's Fritz Lang, having rediscovered him recently, it's made me seek out all these other silent films, like early Murnau, like Eureka, who released the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray restorations. So I've really been binging that, and also I've just really fallen back in love with it, because they are the epitome of what the cinematic form is for, to tell a story visually, compared to modern cinema now, where everything is exposition and cut within an inch of its life. So yeah, it's in this stages, like, you find this, you go through stages where you're going to be binge watching a certain television series, you're going to be binge watching the Marvel movies. At the moment, I'm in that stage of really rooting myself within silent cinema, and it's probably a stage that I'm going to pass off from, but these types of movies are the things that I inherently love, and I think the expressionism, the esotericisms, all of that also really is what's carried from the visual platform. I try to recreate in my own work. So, because cinema was my first great love, it wasn't literature. I don't picked up a book until I was about 9 years of age, and it was always cinema. I always wanted to be a film director, but, you know, making films is a hard business. You need money. Get a cast, get a crew, get a camera. That isn't the be-all, end-all. You need some finances. You need a distribution. You need a platform. And then with literature, it was an eye-opening experience of, this is cinema, but contained within your own brain.
Certainly.
And the freedom to tell these stories. There is a freedom in literature that cinema doesn't have, and that's why I love literature, because there is a freedom for opinion, for atmospherics, and for storytelling, and for the application of storytelling. However you wish to play it out. My encapsulation, I feel I'm more of a visualist as a writer, because where I came from was such a young age, watching movies. It's a very visual medium, and if you can carry that across well in a novel, you don't need to go and make a movie. just lose myself within this book, because then I don't have to set up cameras and I don't have to set up relationships. All I have is a blank piece of paper, and I just have to write. Zac talks about cinema and then goes on about literature. I can't stay on course.
That's fine. That's perfectly fine.
So, Dave from Dave's Corner of the Universe is back to talk about the Mego. Hola, amigo. Are you a fun guy?
So, what did you think of that? You definitely got to listen to all of that information.
Yeah, I did. It was intriguing. It was interesting. I liked his whole thing about it being, you know, like I said, a monster on human scale. You know, and I liked his whole thing. Like, he tells a good story. That guy starts from like the personal and then makes it bigger, and he obviously knows what he's talking about. It's not like when I talk about it, it's like kind of like this and kind of like that, you know. But he, you know, it was interesting. It was interesting, and he's fun to listen to.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's listen to that right now.
Okay.
My name is David Heath, and I run a blog called Dave's Corner of the Universe. Like most people, if you ask me what my favorite food is, it's going to vary from day to day. Monday would be Italian, Tuesday, of course, is Taco Tuesday, Wednesday it might be cake. Likewise, if you ask me what my favorite Lovecraftian creature was, it would change day to day. Maybe it would be the aquatic deep ones one day, and maybe it'd be the great race of Heath another. But if you ask me this question quite a bit, and then you took all the average answers, I'm willing to say that more than 51% of the answers would be the Mego, or also known as the fungi from Yuggoth. They may not be my choice day to day, but in the long run, they're my pick for my favorite Lovecraft critter. And to some extent, I like Lovecraft's critters more than I like his intergalactic entities like Cthulhu or Yogg-Sothoth or Azathoth. I like his deities, his incredible, powerful beings, but I can relate more to his lesser creations, the deep ones, the fungi from Yuggoth, his races, as opposed to his advanced beings and entities like the outer gods or the great old one. One of the reasons for this is that unless you're a protagonist in a Brian Lumley novel, has little chance of surviving Cthulhu, let alone defeating him. But one-on-one, we could handle a Mego. I think this is kind of akin to why people might like Batman more than Superman, or Wolverine more than Captain Marvel. They relate to the street-level superheroes. And in a way, I relate to what I would call the street-level mythos monster. So why are the Mego my favorite street-level mythos monster as opposed to the deep ones, the great race of Heath, the elder things? And the reason is, to me, the fungi from Yuggoth is this perfect blend of both alien and demon. And as we talk about them, I'll explain why I feel that. So let's take a moment to describe what the fungi from Yuggoth look like. Now, they're not true fungi. They're not a fungus. They're just so alien, so different than anything on the planet Earth. The best word that we can kind of describe them is fungus, even though they're not biologically a fungus. They tend to be 3-4 feet tall, and they have bat-like wings. In Lovecraft's 1931 Whisper in the Darkness, which is the main story about the Mego, we get a feeling that these wings are of very little use here on an earthly atmosphere. They tend to be used predominantly to allow the Mego to fly through space. We do have a rather interesting part in the book where it describes 3 of them flying off this big hill, and it almost, trying to get into space, it almost reminds me of like a space shuttle trying to break the atmosphere and to get into space. So they're much more graceful in the ether of the universe as opposed to a terrestrial atmosphere. In fact, that's one of the things that we'll talk more about that I love about the Mego, is their bodies are not designed, their bodies did not evolve for an Earth-like world. Their bodies seem to be a mismatch of mammalian and insectoid traits, and they have 6 arms or legs which end in lobster-like claws, and they will either walk on 6 feet or they will walk on 4 and use the top 2 as arms and hands. In the original story, they did not travel well on Earth, in the Earth atmosphere with the Earth gravity. And the wings were almost useless inside the gravity. I mean, it could allow them to escape, the planet and to get into space, but that was about it. And they usually crawled on the ground. More and more, though, I see artists since 1931 drawing the Mego as if they are hovering or flying. That's not a complaint in any way. It's just how the creature and the character of the Mego has changed since 1931. It's evolved. They also have sort of a tapered round head, which has lights, And that's one of the ways that they communicate, is through these lights. But it's also one of the ways that humans might see them at a distance. All in all, these are truly alien creatures, as in they did not evolve on the planet Earth. Their origin sort of starts with the fact that Lovecraft hated the trope that was common in the 1920s and the 30s. In the aliens are little green men from Mars. They're going to look like humans. They're going to speak English. They're going to have eyes in their head, maybe a third eye, maybe a couple of antennas. But they're slightly changed human beings. And Lovecraft thought that was lazy writing. That he was ahead of his time in the belief that if something is going to evolve in an alien environment, it truly will be alien and not resemble human beings with green paint on them. I think that Lovecraft would have absolutely hated the Star Trek aliens, the Vulcans, which have the pointy ears, or the Klingons with the ridges on their head. I think he would have hated that idea if he had lived long enough to see that on television. So he designed an alien for an alien environment. And as far as I'm concerned, in 1931, he was ahead of the curve on this. Now, we do see things like, War of the Worlds, where the aliens have a different gravity. The Martians have a different gravity, so they have to build machines here on Earth. We see a little bit of that in John Carter of Mars, but Lovecraft really took this and ran with it. He was way ahead of his time with this concept of aliens shouldn't be just humans in makeup. So Lovecraft actually outdoes even himself at how alien these aliens are. They are truly different from human beings at a molecular level, in such that it's hard to record their sounds or their voices with a record. It's difficult to photograph them. They become sort of blurred forms and distant shadow shapes when you photograph them. Mego are different at a molecular level than everything on the planet Earth. Now, I've seen this concept and run with in the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, where I've seen keepers have made their players make a roll of dice because the Mego are interacting with the atmosphere at a different, where their molecules are vibrating in this such an alien way that the humans sense it before they can see or hear it, and they just feel as if they're in a bad place and the hair on the back of their necks just goes straight up. This is this incredibly scary, spooky, creepy concept that is one of the reasons why I adore the Mego. So when I read The Whisper in the Darkness when I was 13 or 14 at a bus stop waiting to go to school, the thing that really I caught on to, or really struck me, was how the Mego get to Earth. They don't build UFOs. They don't build rocket ships. They fly to the Earth on their wings. And this sort of stuck out to me. I was in a post-Star Wars, post-Alien, post-Close Encounters of the Third Kind world, where in the 1980s, this concept of the gray alien coming to Earth in their spaceship and probing human beings was beginning to catch on. And it seemed so strange to me that these creatures flew to Earth on their wing. And it's not like the trope of rocket ships didn't exist in the 20s and the 30s. Lovecraft had to have seen, rocket ships all the time when he was looking at, weird tales and amazing stories. They were always on the cover. The Buck Rogers Flash Gordon rocket ship was a common science fiction trope. And I'm not saying a bad trope. Isaac Asimov used it in his Foundation series. So it was a common, well-standard, maybe slightly overused trope, but it wasn't a cliche. And Lovecraft still declined to use it. And you look at all of his alien menaces and strange creatures, the Mego, Cthulhu, the Star Spawn, they all travel through space on their wings. The Yithians project their conscious across time and space. Lovecraft just did not use, for whatever reason I don't know, did not use the common rocket ship trope of that time. Now, I've just spent the last couple of minutes telling you how much I love the fungi from Yuggoth because they're so different from us human beings. Now I'm going to tell you why I love them, because they are similar to us human beings. And that's psychologically. They are similar to us in mindset in certain ways and different in other ways. An example is why they came to this solar system in the first place. And that was to mine rare metals. So this demonstrates, if not greed, it at least demonstrates that they, like human beings, have a concept of resources and the rarity and scarcity of resources, and to some extent possibly a form of capitalism. Although I suspect that they're more of a collective mine when they are mining as opposed to a guild or a corporation. We don't know that. And that's another thing that Lovecraft does brilliantly. He gives you a little taste, a little picture, and then goes on to another subject. So he writes about other creatures and lets later authors and novelists and even movie makers come up and fill in the blanks that he left. The Mego, too, have this sort of hands-off approach to human beings, where they don't go out looking for trouble or causing trouble among human beings, but if human beings stumble upon their projects or their bases, then they are more than willing to skin us and put our brains in a space bucket and fly us to Yuggoth. But they don't go out looking for problems. In ways, human beings are just beneath. If they're not causing problems, they're not attacking the fungi from Yuggoth, then they just let us go. We're like ants to them. They're that much more advanced. Now, there is an exception that makes them kind of human-like, in that they do have this scientific curiosity. And not only are they curious, not only are they scientific in nature, they're good at it. They're extremely advanced in the mining engineering. They're extremely advanced in the biological sciences. Even though they have these lobster-like claws for hands, they are light years beyond us in these sciences, as well as probably ecological sciences and space sciences, probably chemistry and physics too. They are just much more evolved scientists than the human race is. That, in a way, makes them our brothers and sisters, even though I guess they're sexless, is that we share this interest in knowledge and understanding and the sciences. It's just, as a human scientist might experiment on an animal, the same. The Mego, we are no more than advanced animals. so they have no repercussions or no bad feelings about experimenting on us because it justifies their scientific curiosity. They seem to worship Nyarlathotep, but they don't seem to be a very pious species. In fact, they seem to be locked in a holy war with the followers or a cult of Hastur, possibly in his avatar of the King in Yellow. But from what I get, especially from the writings of later people came after Lovecraft, is that they don't seem to be a pious race. They seem to understand that these are true, real entities. They don't have faith in them. They see them. They talk with Nyarlathotep. They see Hastur in this war. So they know they are real entities and respect them and follow them and do what they tell them so that they are not destroyed. But it's not faith or love that generates their worship of these creatures. And from these few just throwaway paragraphs that Lovecraft puts out there about their holy war with the followers of Hastur, it doesn't seem that the fungi from Yuggoth started it. It seems they're defending themselves from an attack by religious zealots. Now, it's very important that we remember at this time that the narrator, Akeley, is this ultimate unreliable narrator who is at best drinking the Kool-Aid of the fungi from Yuggoth and is on their side, or at worst is either possessed or replaced, or is actually Nyarlathotep is speaking in his place, and it is actually an outer god or that is addressing the reader as if he is Akeley the character. So it may surprise listeners that even though the fungi from Yuggoth are one of the best known, well known of the Lovecraftian critters, there's only one real story they appear in, one poem, and then a couple of throwaway lines and a couple of other stories that just make sure you tie the Mego to the rest of the Cthulhu Mythos, or what we now call the Cthulhu Mythos. That was pretty much Lovecraft's style. He would do a deep dive into something new in one of his stories, and then they would never come up again except for, little bits here and there just to tie all of his works together in the same universe. I describe it as that he had creative ADD, that as soon as he was finished with a story or a beast or a monster or an outer god to the point where he was happy with it, he would go and chase the next shiny. So before we get too deep down the rabbit hole, I want to discuss something that I said in the beginning of this podcast. No, not that I like Taco Tuesdays, although I do. Well, no, what I said was that I thought that the fungi from Yuggoth was this perfect blending of demons and aliens. And not only are they so strange and different from us as demons or aliens would be, but I also see the demonic part in their relationship with human beings, because they will at times reach out and deal and work and associate with human beings, if for no other reason their own survival. But these are almost always Faustian bargains, and it tends to not work out for the human being in the way that they thought it would be. An example is a flash fiction story I wrote, in where a young woman is just so madly in love with this guy who won't give her the time of day, she makes a deal with the Mego so that they can be together forever. And then the Migos come and basically cut out their brains, put their brains in life support jars, and they spend the rest of their existence on this frozen planet, sitting next to each other as disembodied brains on a closet shelf. So to the Mego, they have completely fulfilled their bargain, but to the human beings, it wasn't the way they thought it would turn out, even though the Mego kept their portion of the deal to the letter. So, as I said before I was so rudely interrupted by a thought, the main story that Lovecraft presents, the fungi from Yuggoth, is Whisper in the Darkness. If you've never read that story, I'm going to surmise it here. So, spoiler warning, if you want to go out and read it and want to be surprised, you might want to jump ahead about 3 minutes in the podcast here. Okay, we just got left people who know the story or are cool with spoilers. Well, I hope so, because I'm going to a Cliff Notes version of the story. The protagonist of this story is named Albert Wilmarth. And Wilmarth is very much this typical Lovecraftian hero. He is an assistant professor at Miskatonic University. He is an expert on folklore, but has studied these ancient writings and these creepy mysteries that seem to predate human beings enough that he's mentioned in the Mountains of Madness, where the other academics that are on the Arctic expedition wish that he didn't talk so much about these creepy things, because it's giving him nightmares when they see that what he was talking about looks like it's real. He's apparently a bachelor, has no real interest or hobbies other than academia, and he handles himself the way Lovecraft felt a upper class gentleman of letters should. He is a Lovecraftian hero to the T. And he starts out, though, sort of ignorant. He knows all about these things and these happenings, but he thinks until he experiences them firsthand that they truly are folklore. Lovecraft, of course, was this devout atheist, and most of his characters start out with this agnostic approach to anything supernatural, which Lovecraft had. The only difference is Lovecraft felt that nothing supernatural happened in our world. This is a world that he created where the supernatural is there, but knowledge is not known. So his heroes, such as Albert here, undergoes this sort of twisted, upside down, bizarre Joseph Campbell hero's journey, where they go into this blind, agnostic world of matter and materialism to have their eyes open to this universe of strange and alien things. And most human minds can't accept this and go crazy, at least to some degree. And he becomes curious about these strange bodies that are found in the aftermath of Vermont floods. And these bodies, they quickly dissolve into nothing. Now, we as the reader and know a little bit about the fungus from Yuggoth, we realize that this is part of their alien nature, that once they die, they dissolve so much quicker in the terrestrial environment than if something from Earth had died. So he's setting it up, even though the protagonist doesn't know it yet. He's setting it up for an experience for this creature that we've already described is completely alien to the earthly environment. So Wilmarth gets in contact with Henry Ackley, who is a noted folklorist who his wife had died and his only surviving son had moved out. So he basically retired and became a hermit in the Vermont woods. And most of the story is sort of them dealing or communicating between each other, with Ackley's dealing with these strange creatures, where he tries to photograph them and they're smudged, where he records at least one of their religious celebrations or festivals or rituals, and they seem to be coming closer and closer as he tries to get closer to them, to the point where they even seem to do a sort of a intensive attack on the farm that he's living in, and Ackley's guard dog is killed. Ackley then does a sort of 180 complete, says, hey, we've misunderstood them. They're not these terrible, evil aliens out to hurt us. And, oh, by the way, all that evidence that I've sent you, could you bring it back to me? When Wilmarth gets to this creepy old house in creepy old Vermont, Ackley isn't as quite how he thought he'd be. He's got bandages over his neck. He can barely talk. So what it comes out is that this isn't Ackley. This is a Mego or some other creature, or possibly even outer god, who is basically wearing Ackley's skin, and Ackley's brain is in this can going through space, and Wilmarth runs off panicked. And for you, those of you who have left us, so because you didn't want any spoilers, well, you can come back in. So that is the main story where the Mego, also known as the fungi from Yuggoth, appear. Now, they do appear as a throwaway comment in other stories. So in the Mountain of Madness, not only do we have the Miskatonic Antarctic exploration team thinking that Wilmarth is creeping them out with all his old stories from the Necronomicon, but there's this line where we find out that the Elder Things fought the Mego, which is not surprising because the Elder Things fought everything. They fought the polyps from the flying polyps. They fought the Cthulhu Starspawn. They fought, most famously, the Shoggoths. So at least during a period of time, they were at war with the Mego. There is an equally throwaway line in Through the Gates of the Silver Key, where the narrator sees the white-colored fungi on the planet Yuggoth. Now, before he wrote The Whisperer in the Darkness, Lovecraft went through a poetry phase. And the best of all of Lovecraft's poetry is a collection of sonnets called The Fungi from Yuggoth, which is where he at least got the name or the nickname for the Mego. And despite the name of the Sonic collection being the fungi from Yuggoth, they have very little in common with the Megos that we are going to see in Whisper in the Darkness. One big difference is that the Yuggoth in the poems is definitely going to be extraterrestrial, where the Yuggoth in the short story is the fabled ninth planet, which we often, to us and to even readers at the time, associated with Pluto. The sort of retcon exploration for this is that the Megos come from a planet called Yuggoth that is in another solar system. When they came to the Sun's solar system, the first planet that they set a base up on, they named after their home world, Yuggoth. So, Pluto, as we know it, was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh in 1930. This happened in between the poems and the short story. So Lovecraft, who was very interested in astronomy, would have been keeping up. He would have known and seen. It was all in all the papers about this search for the mysterious ninth planet and for, Tombaugh's discovery. So it's possible that he changed it from an intergalactic to a interplanetary setting because of the major event of finding Pluto. So if we say Yuggoth, at least one of the Yuggoth, and Pluto is the same thing, then Lovecraft was right about one science fact, in the fact that his Yuggoth has a moon. Now, of course, in this moon, aliens carve things on monoliths and ancient terrible prayers, but he was right that that there was a moon of Pluto. Well, in a lot of things that had to do with science, Lovecraft was only partially right, because Pluto actually has 5 moons. But it wasn't until 1978 that the largest moon of Pluto, Charon, was identified. So in that way, he was right. Now, Lovecraft had a keen interest in science, especially astronomy. If he had not gotten so sick in his high school days, if he had not been so bad at math, he really wanted to go to Brown University and get a degree in astronomy. At the best, Lovecraft had an enthusiastic layman's view on science and understanding of science. He was in no way a scientist. He was enthusiastic about science, but he was not a scientist himself. So a lot of his science is wrong. And one of those we see is the theory of ether. Now, ether was this believed thingamabob, I don't know how to describe it, that existed in space even though there was no atmosphere. And with this is what the Mego and the star spawn of Cthulhu are able to glide in space with. Now, we in our post-Sputnik, post-Apollo 11 universe, we realize that space is a vacuum and that these wings on these creatures wouldn't do any good. They're useless. They can't flap them to fly. But before we get so hard on Lovecraft because he believed at the time in ether, we've got to remember Tesla believed in it too. And his designs for spaceships were on the assumption that ether existed outside the Earth's atmosphere. So it's not like he took this blind faith leap. at this screwball crackpot scientific theory. There were other people who were in the know who believed that ether exists. But ether is the only way that we humans could understand these aliens with wings flying through space. So let's go ahead and compare Migos to other aliens. And let's start off with the alien, the xenomorph from the Aliens franchise. I see them similar in the fact that these are creatures that are so different from human beings that the xenomorph, has to put an egg inside a living being to procreate. Where is it a mammal? Is it a insect? It's the same thing. What is the fungi from Yuggoth? Are they lobster-like? Are they insects? Are they mammals, or a combination of all of the above? The other thing is, we don't really think about it, but these xenomorph has to be magic. And by that I mean they have to have some way that is beyond our understanding of science that allows him to exist. So you have this little tiny chest buster who grows to this 7-foot full head-eating xenomorph without bringing any food, without bringing any more matter to increase its size. That's not science to us, that's magic. We don't understand how that's possible. We accept it because it's a science fiction story, and we realize this creature just does not obey our laws of biology and physics. In the same way, the fungi from Yuggoth does not obey our understanding of science. It gets by it by using a super science that we assume is magic. I see a lot of connection too with John Carpenter's The Thing. And if you consider that both of these are pulp stories, and that John Campbell, who goes here, the short story that The Thing is based on, really loved Lovecraft, especially The Mountains of Madness, you can see where he would have drawn from the same wellspring. In fact, many people consider the Who Goes There as part of the Cthulhu Mythos, at least the original short story. But even when you see this sort of creature in the movies where you've got these like spider leg and husky's head and human head and this sort of mix mash of different parts, I see this sort of the same way as the fungi from Yuggoth. It's sort of this truly alien, truly horrific total that is made up of sums of parts that should not be combinable. One creature that predates the fungi from Yuggoth is the Martians from H.G. Wells' War of the World. But in the 80s there was a War of the Worlds TV series that, at least for the first season, I just loved. And in this, the Martians, to survive our atmosphere and our germs, basically had to exist inside a human body. And then when they wanted to kill a human being, the third Martian arm would bust out of their chest and they would squeeze somebody's head so tight until their eyes popped out. And I've always wondered, even though the Martian of War of the Worlds pre-exists the fungi from Yuggoth by about 41 years, I wonder if the makers of the television series ever thought about, or if they were fans of Lovecraft. And since Lovecraft really is the bedrock and foundation of modern horror, I'm sure they had to have been aware of it. Another monster alien creature that I've always thought might have been inspired by Lovecraft was Edgar the Bug, or as my friends and I used to call him, Edgar's suit, where the insect basically made a suit out of the farmer Edgar and then went on his mission to find the universe gem or whatever MacGuffin was in the movie. And again, I find this very, very similar to the fungi, especially when they wear the Ackley suit. We see the fungi Yuggoth very much, I think, in the modern concept of the gray alien or the Roswell gray, and the fact that these are creatures that don't have our emotions but have this incredible scientific curiosity, and that they will abduct and experiment on human beings. In ways, Lovecraft predicted this whole abductee experience 30 years before, the Betty and Barney Hill case. We even get this almost ridiculous similarity between the Greys and the fungi from Yuggoth in the fact that neither one of them seem to wear clothes. In fact, the Whisperer in the Darkness can almost seem a modern allegory to the Close Encounters system created by J. Allen Hynek. So we have Close Encounters of the first kind, which are this distance. You see them, which is the first thing, Ackley starts seeing these lights at night when the Mego are talking to each other. He sees them. Then the second Close Encounter of the second kind, which is, physical evidence. Ackley has this recording. And then you have this third Close Encounter of the third kind, where Ackley is abducted. And then even the later on added Close Encounter of the fourth kind, in which a person's life is drastically changed by the experience, which happened to Womack. So in ways, Lovecraft, if not later influenced the abductee tales, he at least predicted it. One last thing I want to talk about is a theory that if you've read my blog, or that you've read or listened to what I've said on this and other podcasts, one of the things that deeply influenced nerd culture is the role-playing game craze of the 80s and 90s. The 800-pound hobgoblin in the room is, of course, Dungeons and Dragons. And a distant second and third is Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. Now, it seemed to me, especially in the 80s and early 90s, that really surprising how well Call of Cthulhu as a role-playing game just took off. I mean, it was set in the 1920s. Most role-play players in the 80s, all they knew about the 20s was that Star Trek episode, A Piece of the Action, and, the TV show and later movie, The Untouchables. In a format where combat is seen as the pinnacle of the experience, you did combat, you were killed, where the highlight of an adventure would be reciting something right in Latin. But it did really well. And one of the things that keepers or game masters of Call of Cthulhu at the time, they couldn't really throw Hastur, Cthulhu, Azathoth at a party without completely wiping them out. So the Mego became this really good, again, I'm going to use that term I used in the beginning, sort of street level creature that the players could tackle without 100% guarantee of losing all of their sanity. So this experience, so many people experience from the game, even if they only played the game a couple of times, and they experienced the deep ones and the Mego, and that was about it, people remembered it. And so I think that's why the Mego still exists in nerd culture. Well, thank you for spending the last 45 minutes or so with me. My name's Dave, and you can find me at my blog, Dave's Corner of the Universe.
So, when I was a kid, I was riding with my grandpa, and it was from, one place to the other, and he used to like to listen to Dr. Demento on the radio, which, if you don't know what Dr. Demento is, it's a radio program that features novelty music. And sometime in around 86, 87, there was this song that had a doon 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 jazz beat. And my grandpa turned it up a little bit, being like, "Oh wow, this is gonna be some sort of jazzy thing." And then it's two guys talking about going down to the beach, and then it breaks out into punk music, and he turns it down, but he doesn't change the station because the fact that he thinks it's kind of funny that it's about punk kids bragging about being shitty people, and that it must actually be satire about people making fun of people who are just shitty at being just punks satirizing shitty teenagers with cars. And
you said this was in 86?
This is about 86, yeah.
So you were 10.
Yeah.
Not to out you.
And then it took a couple years later, I finally tracked down a copy of this album, and then saved my money to buy everything on tape, and then buy everything on CD. Anyway, I finally got a chance to track down Rodney Anonymous of the Dead Milkmen, who at one point in time for one of his albums went by H.P. Hovercraft.
So for one of his albums, he went by H.P. Hovercraft?
H.P. Hovercraft, yeah.
So this gave you a clue.
I was like, I think this guy knows something.
Yeah.
And then he had an album called The King in Yellow.
There you go. It's
So I'm like, all right.
Cinch there.
All right. There's a lot of references to kind of stuff that I like. And I got to talk to this guy. So here it is. Me talking to that guy. So Rodney, thank you for coming onto the show and talking about weird with us. Yay. So one thing I've noticed over the years is a dark sense of the bizarre and a satirical sense in Dead Milkman's musical catalog, almost like a synthesis of weird fiction, B-movies, weekly world news, Time Life collections about serial killers, conspiracies, and dead rock stars.
I think when we were young, Joe started me down the road of Donald Bartholomew, a big influence, and all the Donald Bartholomew stuff was just weird sort of new fiction.
Yeah.
I think that's why, it got filtered through that. It all came out the other end. Ew. That was just kind of the nature. It kind of had to be. Plus, growing up in that time period in America, it was not wonderfully dark, but a lot of darkness. I mean, it's horribly dark now.
Yeah.
But back then, it was dark where you could have some fun with it. Like Jonestown was actually kind of funny in retrospect.
Yeah.
And now Alex Jonestown, which is, I guess, what will happen next, probably won't have the humor to it. I don't know. It's weird because it seems like we're living in some sort of odd dystopian fiction. So fortunately, I've had lots of practice reading a lot of that stuff.
Sure. You've used the name H.P. Hovercraft on Soul Rotation, I think it was?
Well, I should have stuck with Rodney Anonymous because it's such a good name.
Yeah.
And my first name is Rodney, and I like the Anonymous part. And Anonymous is, of course, my favorite author. I've been writing for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
The H.P. Hovercraft happened because we were in Chicago, and I usually would room with our roadie, who was also my friend Matt. And Matt had somewhere to go. He had a friend in Chicago, so instead of staying in the hotel, he went and stayed at his friend's house. And we had a couple days before the show or whatever. I don't know why we were in there so early. And I was kind of trapped in the hotel. I think the weather was kind of crappy. So I went to a bookstore, and I'd always been meaning I'd read some H.P. Lovecraft, but I'd always been meaning to take a deep dive. So I got my hands on all these H.P. Lovecraft paperbacks and just sat and just over a couple days in the hotel, just devoured.
Nice.
Became a big fan. I've been a big fan before, but I became a super big fan during that period.
And also, I noticed at one point in time, you guys had an album called The King in Yellow that came out.
What had happened was my wife and I were watching that's actually a short story I recommend to a lot of people.
Sure.
But my wife and I were watching a thing called Cigarette Burns on Master Horror. And, of course, it has Udo Kerr in it because Udo Kerr makes everything marvelous.
Oh, yeah.
And I was explaining to my wife it was about this film that drove you insane.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling my wife there's about The King in Yellow, which she'd never read, which is odd because she's heard me recommend it to a lot of young people.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, she sent away for like an exact replica of the way it was originally printed and all that. And she loved it. And so when we were looking for album titles, I thought it'd be great because I thought the album will eventually just make it disappear. We'll have it out there for a while, and then we'll disappear it, and then we'll start the rumor that it drives people crazy. I thought that'd be great. I thought it was just like the best marketing campaign ever, which is why I don't think you can get it anymore. I think people took it too seriously. Unfortunately for us, around that time, the show True Detective was on, and they were playing around with The King in Yellow.
Yeah.
And, you always have that marketing element within any organization that'll put stuff up like, hey, everybody, if you like True Detective, we have an album called King in Yellow. Like, no. So I'd have to tweet out, like, the two things have nothing to do with each other. I would purposely kill sales of people who wanted to know, who thought they were True Detective clues.
Yeah.
I'm good at killing sales. I'm not good at, like, making people buy something, but I'm just like, no. With The King in Yellow, I mean, everyone, I usually, a lot of young people ask me, like, what do you read? And that's one of the first things I always recommend. It is horrifying. And, to think of when it was written, the late 1890s, and the fact that, it's so far ahead of its time. It's absolutely visionary and frightening, and, it's a horrendous ride. Like Robert Bloch, if you've ever saw interviews with him, he's talking about, I was watching when I was young, he was on, like, the Tomorrow Show or something with Tom Snyder, which is scary enough. And they had, like, him on, Mickey Spillane, I forget who else. And Mickey Spillane was talking about, like, describing the comma-shaped hole that a gun had put in somebody's stomach. And without missing a beat, Robert Bloch was like, if he just aimed a little bit lower, they could have left him with a semicolon. I was like, Robert Bloch is a disturbed individual. Oh, I think all those guys were.
Oh, yeah. One thing I wanted to get into with my next question is some of my listeners don't know who you are, and could you give me
Let's keep it that way.
a brief kind of like bio of the Dead Milkmen?
It's a band that's been around since the New Year's Eve of 1980. Okay. Which is when I think. But it existed in Joe's mind for a long time before that. Joe's our guitarist. I've been in this band since really I was like 17, and I'm 56 now. I've been in this band forever. It is best described as a punk rock band that has just never gone away. So so if you don't know who I am, I'm in that organization. I'm not the pleasant one that sings on Punk Rock Girl. I'm the other one. It's all the grouchy stuff to do, which is great because in the end, it's given me a lot of voice acting work. People are like, no, we want the guy from Stewart. Get him. I never thought that would pay off, but it really has been for acting. It's been occasionally I act on a thing called Welcome to Anadonia. Okay. That's another thing. And if you don't know me from that, I have a radio show that does all. I play mostly goth, industrial. I do a lot of crap. And I have another thing called Seventh Victim. So I'm always doing something.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool.
Right now, I'm slurping on a smoothie, so it sounds like the old ones coming up from the sea here. Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yum, yum. So I was curious if there was any like weird fiction that influenced like any of your work, or if what your influences are for kind of your, I don't know, kind of dark humor.
Well, weird stuff I love is, and I collect these. I actually do have, and I probably shouldn't talk about it, I do have a first edition Lovecraft, which I guard heavily. I collect a lot of books. It's called having a home library, I guess. Yeah. I read them, too. I don't just collect them. But there was stuff that I loved early on that you could get. I mean, you could find them for super cheap. The hardback, which were the old Weird Tales, which were fantastic short stories and always really disturbing. There's a short story called Shuttlebop I heavily recommend to people. So that's what I went through. You know, I always like that sort of pulp stuff, but I like the stuff that when I was younger and it was just ending up in like thrift stores and stuff, still had the covers from the 60s. So they were very psychedelic and you just wanted to read them because they just looked so horrendous and weird and scary. So that's kind of what, as I say, that a lot of Donald Bartholomew, big influence on me. I'm trying to think of who else. I have a huge. I have a short attention span, so I will hop from one thing to another quickly. So I'll read a lot of nonfiction, then I'm back into the fiction, and then pop back and forth. There's Arthur Machen, who wrote The Monk. It was like a lot of that early stuff is a huge. Also, did Machen write The Monk? I think Machen wrote The Monk, and then also George Lippert, who wrote The Monks of Monk Hall. So anything with monk in the title, I'll read. Lippert was here from Philadelphia and was just completely bonkers. And I heavily recommend. Monks of Monk Hall, also known as the Quaker City, was the first bestseller in America, and it almost got Lippert killed. Lippert, who was my size, I'm about 5 foot even, used to have to walk around with a sword cane because they were going to produce this as a play, and people showed up and rioted and were going to kill him. But he's an absolutely fascinating character, just like total Philadelphian. And he performed his own marriage to his mistress out along the Wissahickon Creek, out by where the Witch of the Wissahickon used to live.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's quite interesting. George Lippert, look him up, people. Yeah.
Nice.
And if you don't have a copy of The Monks of Monk Hall, you should get one. That book is bonkers. Also, one I recommend McGraw. It's spelled McGrath, but it's McGraw who wrote the book Asylum, which is fantastic. I heavily recommend that. Trying to think of like what I would recommend off the top of my head. But I like him because he did kind of like a nice return to Gothic horror.
Yeah.
Matthew McGregor, that's who wrote The Monk.
Okay.
Now it pops back in my head. I'm not facing my library. I'm facing away. I guess a smart thing would have been to set up with the phone near my library. You know, oh, that's who wrote this or that. But,
yeah. So do you have any songs like, I guess specifically Dead Milkman, that were influenced or kind of like based off of cosmic horror, gothic horror, or any kind of weird fiction?
Yeah, there's a song called Somewhere Over Antarctica, which is basically, Dean had read The Mountains of Madness. It was weird to say, I think he took a while getting to Lovecraft. So I think that might have even been on the last album. And, my wife keeps thinking I wrote it, but I just contributed keyboard parts to it. But yeah, it's a total nod to Lovecraft. So it's a nod. It's totally. If you read The Mountains of Madness, you'll get that. I think it's in The Mountains of Madness too, where the guy is running, and in order to keep from going bonkers, he's reciting all the stops along the one of the Boston train lines.
Yeah.
I always think that's kind of cool, like subway line. So that's what I do. I think I'm going to go bonkers. Just like all the stops along the Broad Street line.
So we've talked about books and we've talked about whatnot. I heard recently that you used to play Dungeons and Dragons. Have you played?
I still do every opportunity I get.
Yeah.
I did a podcast where my son, the Dungeon Master.
Oh, cool.
And I had a stack of books next to me, and apparently they had somebody on who was a stickler for the rules. So I was opening up old copies of the Dragon from like 1979 or whatever.
Oh, cool.
Well, it says here in the December 1979 issue of the Dragon. Yeah, I'm very proud of that. And the odd thing is that the people I've met who were really into it later in my life were a lot of adult film stars, which I thought was a side fun. But where are these people when we were sitting around playing it, around the table when I was in my teens? We could have used them. They would have been helpful career advice. So yes, I am. That is the thing with me.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I played a lot as a teen, and honestly, we listened to a lot of the Dead Milkmen while we played Dungeons and Dragons.
I think for us, it was like a lot of Rush and Pink Floyd or stuff like that. That's kind of all there was at the time.
Yeah.
And Frank Zappa, I guess, but I don't know if he meshed well with D and Dave. I loved playing it, and got my wife to play it once, and she turned out to be really good at it. But my wife was like the cool girl in high school. She's a little bit younger than me, so she would have had nothing to do with me. And we got her to play it, and she was so good at it, embarrassed the rest of us.
Nice.
Yeah, any chance I get to bust everything out. In fact, I took it all out, spread it all on the floor once, and took a picture of it all. So still love gaming. I did wargaming for a long time.
Sure.
And then that led me to a game called Malifaux.
Yeah.
Because I was at one of the gaming conventions, and I saw all these weird, like my kind of people, industrial goth-looking punk weirdos. And I'm like, wait a minute, what are they playing? And that's how I picked up on Malifaux. But I've been so super busy between a lot of the political stuff I do and all the work, music and stuff like that, and my regular job, I had not had a chance to get back to gaming. Which is a shame. My wife loved Malifaux because it was card-based, and she could beat me at it.
Yeah, have you played any of the Call of Cthulhu games in the past?
I have Call of Cthulhu, and I have played it. I actually have some of the figurines that came out way back in the past.
Oh, nice.
Which is awesome. But I have not played it in years.
Yeah.
I always loved it, though. I always thought it was really well done. And they still have it out there. It's in several forms, and I think they still keep making modules for it.
Yes, they do.
I have a rule, which I had in effect for years, which was no video games. Because I could easily get addicted to them.
Yeah.
My wife and I went on vacation, and basically it was us alone in this creepy old house. It was a bed and breakfast, but nobody was coming there to stay. So we had the place to ourselves, and I had a lot of time to relax and think, and I was thinking, I do too much, I stress out, I should get a video game. So I started looking into horror video games.
Yeah.
And I found this thing called Layers of Fear. Fantastic. And they, of course, after I get addicted to it and wind up playing a bunch, they announced Layers of Fear 2 will be out. So yeah, that's been my thing lately. I enjoy playing that.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think I have a background for my PS4 that's Layers of Fear. I was like, ooh, this game's too spooky to play, eh? Ooh.
Yeah, I heavily recommend it. The first one, you play an artist who goes mad and starts using bits of people to paint with. And the second one is you're an actor. It takes place. But the second one, I was letting Vienna, my wife, I had her try on the headphones because it has the binaural audio.
Yeah.
Which actually is, in itself, the sound is a jump scare. And it sets you on edge. It's so well done. So I've been experimenting, working that into music lately. I did a little thing the other day where I snuck some binaural in and did it live, just to see. And it seems to have been disturbing.
Cool.
I did it live on the Seventh Victim Facebook page, and then I ported it over to my other one. But I set up a whole bunch. I keep rearranging my keyboards for Seventh Victim, like what I'm using. And I'm thinking, this is my last iteration. There's a thing called it's called GAS. It's Gear Acquisition Syndrome. It's a real thing. Where people just think, I just need one of these. I need this, and I don't want to fall into that hole. I don't want to spend a lot of money. I believe that you should get the cheapest instruments you can and just work with them. I'm still slurping away at my. I'm trying to get every little bit of this smoothie.
Sure. Do you have any projects coming up that you can tell people about, or?
I'm still working. I have a thing called Seventh Victim that takes up a bunch of my time now, which is good because I enjoy it. And our singer, Janet, it's just me and somebody else. I play all the synthesizers, samplers, everything. And then, so live, there's no computer involved now. I finally got myself unshackled from the laptop. I liked working with her so well. She was so professional that, we continue to work together. So that's eating up a lot of my time, but in a good way. So we keep experimenting with that, and she's coming over tonight to work on another project. I've got to run a couple of things by her when I see her, so I have a whole list of stuff. So that is and we just started making our own fanzine.
Oh, cool.
It's a joke, but people bought a lot of them. So we're like, oh no, this is going to be many, many trips to the post office.
Well, congratulations on many trips to the post office.
Yeah. Well, we didn't figure out the pricing of it, so I think we lose a couple bucks on every one. But it's just nice to have something like that because we were saying what from the '80s would come back, and we were like fanzines.
Yeah.
but you get a free rubber snake with it.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah. Free rubber snake. Can't say no to that. And there's a Thomas Ligotti plug that we have. You know, I did a summary of Thomas Ligotti and I would say the new one, but it's our first one.
Cool.
So there's horror fiction reference for you.
Nice, nice. Well, we love the horror fiction around here.
Main go-to for Portland is always Talking to Ghosts.
Yeah.
I love Talking Ghosts is great, but those guys are so low-key but so interesting, and they never seem to know how. And their interviews are fantastic because they'll interview people. So that is like where all my Portland news comes from. I was just out there, and I went and I DJ'd at the Lovecraft, oddly enough, after the show, which was I love that place. That's a great club. The first time I DJ'd there, I blew out the sound system.
Oh, wow.
We went to about 4:30 in the morning. So now you have to get out of there, too.
Yeah.
This time I blew out their smoke machine. So I was pretty pleased with the damage I've done to the and they keep paying me. They're like, here's some money. Here, you damaged our place. Here, take this money and go. So yeah, that was, Portland to me is just, play the show and then get over to the Lovecraft as quickly as possible.
Nice. Love that bar.
It's a great club. And it's weird, too, because when you DJ a lot of clubs, people want to hear old stuff, like play some Sisters, and it's, when you DJ there, you play a lot of new stuff, and they're like, that's what they want to hear. And they're like, who is that? So you actually have a line of people coming up to the booth, not to ask you to play something, but to ask you what it was you played, which is awesome.
Cool. I think I'm out of questions.
All right, well, that's good. I gotta go prep for Jatto.
All right. Well, Rodney, thank you so much for coming on to the show and being a guest and sharing your wisdom.
Oh, or lack thereof.
Yeah,
All
thank
right,
you.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one.
All right, have a great evening.
You as well.
Game designer Adam Scott Glancy talks Mego with DB.
That is true. Me and Adam sat down this afternoon, and we talked about the Mego for a good period of time, and there was so much stuff there. I'm just going to make a supplemental thing of me talking to Adam about Delta Green and the Migo and Delta Green, and just role-playing, and he tells some really funny stories about killing cultists, and just... Yeah,
wow.
it's fun.
That sounds really fun.
It is really fun.
That sounds really fun.
So that's going to become a separate episode all to itself.
Oh.
So look for that part in the future.
Okay.
What I'm just talking to him about now is just going to be
the Mego
straight up
in general.
just the Mego.
Nice.
So check this out.
Yeah. Game designer Adam Scott Glancy talks Mego with DB.
And welcome back to People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. Today we are talking with game designer and all-around cool guy, Adam Scott Glancy. How are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. I've been wanting to have you on. Now I have the ability to have guests on. I'm getting everyone I want on the show.
Perfection.
Yeah. So could you possibly tell the kids at home, the folks in the cheap seats, who you are, who don't necessarily know?
Well, I find it hard to believe that anyone would know who I was, but this is more mandatory than it is just prescriptive. All right, yes. So once upon a time, I back in like 1996, I did the nerd version of Running Away to Join the Circus, where I left my job at the state attorney's office in Florida and traveled to Washington State, to lovely Seattle, Washington, to go to work with Pagan Publishing.
Okay.
About the Mego, classical Mego. What's your takeaway? I'm interested in knowing what your takeaway is, having been a Lovecraft reader and a reader of the pastiches and follow-on stuff that came out of the various Lovecraft circles. What's your take on the Mego?
Okay, so for me, the Mego are always kind of this, like, in Lovecraft and Lovecraft pastiches, the Migos are always treated like these, like, mad scientist lobster monsters that live up in the mountains and have hillbilly folk protect their stuff. Yeah.
And they definitely fill this niche in Lovecraft's world where aliens are mistaken for demons.
Yeah.
there's some talk about the Migos' relationship as aliens to the rest of the mythos. The Shub-Niggurath and is mentioned, I believe. Nyarlathotep is mentioned in the Whisper in Darkness. So the Migos seem to understand how the universe works.
Mm-hmm.
That there are these greater powers in it, and at the very least, if you want to be doing what you're doing on a galactic scale, you have to tip the hat or bend the knee or pay off the right elder god in order to go about your business on a galactic scale. They don't seem to hate humanity. They certainly treat us as lesser entities. And I've always been intrigued by the idea that there's a fungus aspect to them. They're described as very crustacean-like. We know they're mortal because one died in a flood.
Mm-hmm.
One died and for whatever reason was washed away in a flood and then quickly dissolved. Because they are described as higher dimensional beings, five-dimensional beings, and that takes you into things like having to consider them in light of things like the shadow a Tesseract throws, their relationship to like books like Flatland,
Mm-hmm.
like how the beings in 2 dimension would interpret us as we move through the 2 dimensions they can perceive. We would get bigger and smaller. They might even be able to perceive our internal organs.
Mm-hmm.
So we look like this globally shape-changing mess.
Yeah.
As we pass through their dimension, you know? And it might be so difficult for their senses to understand that their brains, which is where all visual information is actually collected. I mean, our brains fill in our blind spots. Our brains translate 2-dimensional visual information into 3-dimensional sets. Our brains are predictive, which is how we have things like optical illusions. Our brains look at the information and predict this is the next thing we should be seeing, and we imagine we're seeing something that's not there. That the Mego, who knows what they look like?
Yeah.
Our brains interpret them as looking very crustacean. They've got that marvelous head, the tentacles all over it, little short, stubby anemone-like tentacles change color prismatically to communicate, which is a great communication system for creatures that can live in vacuum,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, why in the world? Sound? Whatever, you know. They're definitely mad scientists because they've got that ability to create new organs for themselves. So they got that buzzy voice that they get when they try to mimic human speech. But mostly they seem to want to be left alone. If you're persistent enough to poke around in their places, you'll end up in a jar. That's one that's quite horrible, is the idea that they have the ability to preserve a human mind indefinitely in a artificial device, and that they can take you off into the universe and show you marvelous sights. But you only get to see marvelous sights so long as the visual equipment is plugged into the jar. Otherwise, you're dropped into a sensory deprivation tank that never ends until you are completely mad, which seems problematic. Maybe they don't care whether the brains they take away are mad or not. Maybe a circuit board is a circuit board, you know, whatever they're using the brains for. Certainly people have had that idea that they just plug the human brains into their equipment at some point. But they certainly don't have that great of interest in human brains because they're not harvesting the whole planet to ship them out across the universe, you know, as the new Duracell or the new Intel chip, you know. So maybe we're just a stopgap until they can find a better species to plug into their things. But yeah, they do have that cult around them of individuals who seem dedicated to protecting their secrets in exchange for whatever baubles or knowledge or power the Mego can help provide them, you know. And, you know, sometimes it could be a matter of not so much bribery, but blackmail. There was I'm trying to remember the name of the author. Keith Herbert. One of the last things Keith Herbert wrote before he passed away was a scenario that showed up in Miskatonic River Press. Hold on just a second while I grab it off my shelf.
Sure.
Yeah, it was in New Tales of the Miskatonic Valley.
Oh, yeah.
It was a story called Proof of Life, A Tale of Foxfield. And the basic idea on Proof of Life is that I believe the mayor of the town has had his children taken.
Huh.
And the Mego want him to do stuff for him, so they've taken the children. They're holding on to the bodies, and they've let him keep the brains in the jars. And we'll give you the bodies back later, but you can talk to your kids. And all they do is scream hysterically. So he unplugs the speaker, so he can't hear the screaming anymore.
Oh,
but he leaves the earphones in so he can read them bedtime stories inside their sensory deprivation tanks. And I just thought, well, that's some Mego stuff right there for me.
Yeah. Wow.
That's classic Mego nasty. And I thought it was really great. A guy named Sam Johnson wrote a modern Call of Cthulhu scenario called A Resection of Time.
Mm-hmm.
And he did this marvelous thing, which I agree with completely, where he took some other aspects of modern, what would you call it, UFOlogy, and mixed it into the Mego with this thing where there's a thing mentioned in Whisper of Darkness, which is the story that the Mego appear in, the first one, where it mentions something called the Brotherhood of the Yellow Sign. And that is Lovecraft dipping down into Robert Chambers and plucking out the term the Yellow Sign from his King in Yellow stuff, from Chambers' King in Yellow mythology. It's probably how the mention of the Yellow Sign there is probably how Chambers' King in Yellow mythology gets hooked into the Call of Cthulhu game and has been considered part of the Call of Cthulhu mythos, I mean, that's that's probably the launching point. Obviously, August Derleth had a lot more to do with knitting that in.
Yeah.
But he mentions the Brotherhood of the Yellow Sign as being against or, being against the Mego and hunting the Mego. And so there's this, well, what the hell is what's the Brotherhood of the Yellow Sign? Well, I think it comes up again in, let's see here. I think it comes up again in The Mound, which the Hazel Heath thing that Lovecraft did a lot of extra work for. And I think the Brotherhood of the Yellow Sign, or at least the, I know what it was. Let's see here. I'm checking Daniel Harm's Mythos Encyclopedia. Don't get too far off.
Sure.
In The Mound, the people of Kinyan, the underground internal world under the North American continent, these humans are humans that were never monkeyed with by the Mego. The implication that the Mego took away certain powers that humanity was going to have and dumbed us down so we would never be a threat. Back when we were early parts of evolution, but the people of Kinyan had built a kingdom under the earth and had hidden from the Mego. And they are immortal. They can pass through matter because obviously there's space between atoms.
Yeah.
So they can pass through matter, and they have various mental powers like telepathy, grisly, horrible pseudoscience. But like any superpowered utopian society, they have fallen into horrible decadence and, engage in recreational torture and biological, what would you call it? Biological experimentation.
Yeah.
And any biological entity to them is an opportunity to mash two model kits together.
Yeah.
To kit bash. So they're constantly kit bashing these abominations, and they're terrible. But it's mentioned the Sky Devils. She calls the character refers to them as the Sky Devils, and it's a reference to the Mego. So Sam Johnson, because Hastro's also I think mentioned as one of the gods of Kinyan, he mashes it up so that the Kinyan are the Brotherhood of the Yellow Sign, and they are in the story of the Resection of Time. They're hunting the Mego, and they are adversarial to the Mego, much in the same way as the mythical Nordics are in UFOlogy. Are you familiar with the Nordics? They're
No. the aliens that come down that look like Norwegians.
Well, angel.
Angel. Oh, okay.
And as we all know, if it comes from God, it's a tall, white, blonde-haired dude.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is extra insulting. But yes, they masquerade as the Nordics in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Fill that role, much in the same way that there's the reptilian aliens that are in UFOlogy, which would make great serpent men. If it would be hilarious in a Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green scenario where the people think that the reptilians or the serpent men awakening from the past are actually reptilian aliens from Zeta. He maxed it up so that the Nordics, who are always, and the Nordics as a mythology in UFOlogy, they do occupy a very angelic sphere. They always show up to say that they're here to help, that mankind has a great destiny, and that they're giving you an important message that you need to hear about brotherhood and blah, 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 blah. And it definitely mixes the kind of religious visions that sometimes come with schizophrenia with this new paradigm of, instead of being about God, and it's about aliens and technology. So Sam Johnson mixed in those Nordics, or the Brotherhood of the Yellow Sign, very nicely into his scenario Resection of Time. It's a good read. It's quick, solid scenario. Liked it a lot.
Nice.
And anyways, so the Mego have some antagonists on Earth, but they're not truly human. I think it's mentioned that in the ancient past they may have tangled with the great race of Heath. They may have tangled with the old ones or the elder things of Antarctica. They may have tangled with some of the various tenets of the Earth that have come and then passed away. But it's always repeated that the Mego who are here, this is an outpost.
Yeah.
This is not a colony. No one plans to stay here. It's in the unfashionable western spiral arm of the galaxies. And their real big colony in human space is Pluto, or is a world beyond Neptune, which is kind of hilarious because Lovecraft thought of it before they found Pluto.
All right.
And then, Pluto's discovered, like, holy shit, that Lovecraft guy is a psychic. He knew everything. He knew about Pluto, so clearly the great old ones are real. But now, of course, we're all up in Pluto's business.
Yeah.
Taking pictures of it. And fortunately, science has provided us a second Yuggoth, because that was the world that was supposedly beyond the orbit of Neptune or Uranus. I can't remember which one's further out. But we have the Nemesis Theory now for modern planetary orbits, that there is a gravitational source outside the solar system that causes some of the stranger orbits, or would explain some of the orbits of the outer planets. So Nemesis has now been promoted in the mythology to Yuggoth, which is kind of awesome.
Cool.
So that's who the Mego are. They fill in that marvelous, not even a gap, but this way of explaining demons and otherworldly supernatural creatures and aliens in the same breath, which is sort of that would be Lovecraft. That is the Gothic tale reinvented for a time we were just beginning to realize how much older the Earth was, and just how much older the solar system was, and how much bigger. I mean, I want to say that in Lovecraft's lifetime, they just figured out what a galaxy was.
Yeah.
And the fact that the sky is full of galaxies, I'm like, holy crap. The universe just got thousands and thousands of zeros added to its size, which is just shocking. And the reason we can say that out loud is because we're not really thinking about it. You know, Lovecraft's big fear and terror machine is the total perspective vortex, you know, from Douglas Adams. It's a thing that if you could really see the size of the universe and your place in it, the shock would cripple your mind.
Yeah.
You know, but we can't imagine that. So we're safe, I guess, is the way to put it. And the Mego are these creatures that have transcended that place, in their place in the universe, and have now learned how to fiddle with and manipulate, you know, matter at will, in a way that we have not. And I don't know if it's in their nature, or if by embracing the universe for what it is, they have become the Mego. You know, that they may not be the beings that inhabited whatever world they started off on. You know, there's an implication that their form is altered to suit their environment, and surgically. And so that whatever they started off as, who knows what it was, but they've moved beyond the limitations of their species. It reminds me a lot about transhumanism. You know, they're transfungal, I guess, and have become more than they were.
Yeah.
And perhaps would not be able to recognize their original form if they were to encounter it again. They might just consider their original species more biological matter to experiment with. Try and make useful objects out of, much like they do with humans. But that's the Mego.
Yeah.
They are super, and they do have that wonderful thing that they kind of could care less. They just are not that interested in us. But, you know, holy crap, do not get up in their business.
They've got lightning guns.
Yeah. You know, at the very least. If you're lucky, you get cooked by a lightning gun.
Yeah, yeah. I always think about the story, Shadow, or Whisper in the Darkness, and it's like, how do we know? I mean, okay, so it's like at the end, it's like, wait a minute, so was that an unreliable narrator? Does anyone actually get to experience the universe through those jars? Or was that just like, okay, say this or we're just going to dump your brain into a field?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you don't want us to turn off the light and sound again, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, God, please, no. It's like, you know, I always believed that was an unreliable... The voice in the jar was unreliable.
Oh, yeah.
That it was telling this guy a load of bullshit, either to recruit him into the cult or to maneuver him into a position where he's next on the menu.
Yeah.
You know, to be taken away. And certainly what they needed to ensure, you know, and the reason they're going slow about it is that they're trying to find out who he's communicated to and what he's communicated to them.
Yeah.
So that they can seamlessly both vanish him and, you know, not substantiate his crackpot ideas. There was a UFOologist named, let's see if I've got his book around here. Thought I did. Nope, I'm not seeing it off the top of my head. I'm not going to go digging for it. I really shouldn't remember the guy's name, but he wrote a book called Behold a Pale Horse, which was his giant kitchen sink of conspiracy theory, you know, where he just threw everything in. He threw the protocols of the Elders of Zion. He threw the Illuminati. He threw Roswell, the Greys, although I note that he kept referring to the Greys as having big noses. So chances are, it was just the protocols of the Elders of Zion may have played a much larger part in his cosmology.
Gotcha.
But he was a crazy, cantankerous drunk who was down a leg due to diabetes.
Okay.
Right? And, was the kind of guy that, if he set fire to your yard, you'd say, hey, my yard's on fire. He'd scream freedom and point a gun at you. All right? And so wherever he was living in Nowhere, Arizona, he'd become such a problem that, his neighbors were like, okay, there have been so many complaints about him, but everyone knew his house was an arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
So the cops wouldn't arrest him at his house. They figured we got to wait until we catch him out on the road where we know he's only got like 10 guns instead of the giant arsenal he's got. And they knew they had to get him, but so they try to stop him out on the road. He will not stop. He got out in front of him enough that he gets out of his truck with his artificial leg and is going to walk into his house. Cops are telling him to stop. Stop or we'll shoot. He shoots at them, shoots one of the cops in the head.
Jeez.
But apparently not lethally. And then he goes down in a hail of gunfire, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's just proof that Majestic 12 or the Illuminati or the Jews or, whoever assassinated him, right? Yeah. That just proves everything he wrote in his creepy little claustrophobic conspiracy rant book must be true because he got killed by police. Yeah. Right? So the Mego clearly are trying to avoid that. They're trying to avoid getting rid of a guy in a way that will cause anybody else to come looking and double check his word. They do not want there to be a sequel to the story, right? No reason for any group of investigators to come out and start poking around in that stuff. So the Mego are they're subtle, but they're not as subtle as like they could be, because there's that whole thing with the mask and the hands in the story where it's literally a Mego in a chair covered in blankets with, I guess, the man's face. He's been communicating with Akeley's face, stuck in in his hands that have been turned into prosthetic props. Sam Johnson basically had a thing later where the Mego could take a brain out of a body and their agents could walk around in as many bodies as they wanted. That was one of the things you got to do working with the Mego, is have your brain put into any body you wanted, which leads to any number of problems. Yeah. You could become a heroin addict and just switch bodies, although I'm not sure what that would do to your brain. Engage in gluttony or smoke all the cigarettes you want, and that body gets cancer, you just get another one. Huh. But it was also implied that the Mego could hollow out these human bodies and wear them like meat suits as well, as sort of an expansion of their first experiments into harvesting human body parts to create a deception for the humans, And so definitely they later writers have made them even more subtle than they begin, but they're not infallible. Yeah. They let a body fall into the hands of humans, even if it did dissolve within days or hours after being found, and they certainly have the advantage that they cannot be photographed, I believe. But they can be recorded audibly. Yes, apparently a wax cylinder does the trick. Yep. So it's got that going for it. But yes, apparently the simplest technology. If you paint a Mego or carve it in a rock wall, that's fine. But photographic plates, they can sit for a portrait. I'm curious if Migos would come up on digital technology, or it has to be like analog. Well, that's what I was imagining, is that maybe it's the analog technology that's the problem. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That they could somehow be seen with a digital technology as opposed to an analog technology. Then again, what would the analog technology show you? If they're a fifth dimensional creature and you're seeing it as, with your brain that can interpret 3 dimensions, so you're losing 2 dimensions, and your brain is reinterpreting that data to accommodate what your brain is able to see, your camera is going to show you something that the camera can interpret. It's going to make a bunch of ones and zeros for that digital file.
Yeah.
And, what's that going to look like? It's going to be something that the computer can understand, which may not be what your brain can understand. It may look completely differently. It might look like just some frickin' fractal, there's any number of ways that could go sideways. Again, trying to put a 3-dimensional image of a 5-dimensional creature on a 2-dimensional space. Hey, I'm seeing a problem here,
Yep.
So yeah, that's the Mego. That's the Mego for beginners. They're lobstery with claws and nippers and way too many legs, like the underside of one of those isopods that they bring off the bottom of the sea, and they got blobby tentacle-covered heads that change color in wild prismatic configurations to communicate data between these vast alien minds using a data transfer system that we monkeys can't even follow. Yeah. Plus wings, because they're very fifth dimensional. They can fly through the vacuum of space because their higher dimensional wings are touching on stuff that we can't perceive.
Yeah, that's crazy stuff. I have a question though. If one was to encounter a Mego, how would one defeat the Mego? Well, unless you had like a flood at your disposal.
Yeah, presuming you don't have the wrath of God available on your side. The Mego were shy enough not to want to get shot by shotguns in the short story, The Whisper in Darkness. And we're also shy enough not to want to get too close to the dogs, because the guy starts off with like 30 dogs in his cabin, and I believe sends its minions out to poison them or shoot them as well. So the Mego just don't go, hey diddle diddle right down the middle, we're invulnerable, we can just take you out, right? So I am presuming that while much of them may be imperceptible and therefore untouchable to us in higher dimensional space, that doesn't mean that we can't hurt them, much in the same way that maybe a 2-dimensional object could possibly hurt us. I'm not sure. Would a 2-dimensional object slide through us like a knife, or would it not even contact us?
Yeah.
Certainly, so I'm not 100% sure. Perhaps we can damage the parts of them that interact with our dimension, but not the rest. So I feel that they can be harmed, and I feel that they can be harmed by physical means. But that's just a theory based on their behavior in the short story.
All right.
Certainly there's the game called Cthulhu has game mechanics for interacting with them, and speaks to a vulnerability, but also the fact that they are a fungus means that perhaps they don't have organs. Human weapons are designed to kill things that have organs and that are powered by blood. Shock to organs, shuts down hearts, kills everything on Earth, right? Except bacteria.
Yeah.
That you need, or viruses, you need Clorox bleach for those. But they may not be affected by the same kind of weapons. Shoot a hole in a mushroom. Does that kill a mushroom?
Might hurt.
Their attention might make them angry.
Yeah.
Do they burn? Do they combust? It doesn't show up in the story. Something's bad about being immersed in water.
Yeah.
One presumes that this interfered with their ability to draw. It interfered with their ability to draw whatever it is from our atmosphere that allows them to stay alive. We drown because we can't extract oxygen from that environment. Maybe the Mego went, oh, I guess we're going to grow some gills for the next time so we don't get drowned. Maybe the body was crushed because during the flood a tree fell on it. It was washed out by a riverbank collapse. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that physical means can destroy them.
Cool.
You know, not just immersing a vampire in running water
Mm-hmm.
after filling the Mego's mouth with, you know, holy wafers or whatever. Doesn't seem to be the trick.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they wouldn't need to keep people away if they didn't have some value in their own individual existences. They don't strike me as a hive. They have an intention to protect their individuals. It is perhaps an unreliable narrator, you know, who speaks up from the jar and says, "Oh, the Mego could just totally take over without even breaking a sweat." Remember that?
Yeah.
There's all this talk about they could just sweep us aside if they wanted to.
Uh-huh.
And maybe that's bullshit. Maybe that's just because they are vulnerable to people, you know? Who knows what social organization puts these guys together? Maybe the Mego on Earth are the equivalent of Wild West prospectors deep in Indian country, you know? Yes, they have much greater technology and all that stuff, and they're pulling this stuff out of the ground that means nothing to the local population. And they can trade, you know, iron tools to the locals in order to keep the peace.
Yeah.
So that they don't have to, you know, worry about getting zapped because, you know, they're not, they're treading in somebody else's territory.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows what they're, you know, who is there a Mego nation? A family? Is it just 3 Mego named Bob? You know, I mean, we have no freaking idea. It's an absolute, you know, black box what goes on for them and their species. Because again, you're right. The interrogation of the passenger of the cylinder, you know, who knows what's going on there. So I suspect that they do have some vulnerability. And even if they could wipe us all out, they're uninterested in suffering any more casualties than necessary. You'd figure that all they'd have to do is come up with a nice plague, you know, and wipe us out.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they need to do. And it wouldn't require nukes or, you know, photon torpedoes or whatever. You know, they could just make us all sneeze and fall over dead, much like we did to the American Indians when we showed up.
Yeah.
Just our presence, you know. But I think they're vulnerable to human interactions. Yeah. But you know, it's like those guys on the Andaman Islands. You know, those Stone Age guys with spears who occasionally, you know, just come out and throw spears at the Indian Army or at shipwrecked sailors.
Mm-hmm.
They're a threat if you're on their island.
Yeah.
But India has nukes, you know, so yeah, India could nuke the island and solve the problem, but they're not going to for, you know, their own reasons. In our case, it's, you know, nobody wants to be a genocidal scumbag.
Sure.
Just nuke these poor natives who've fortunately been left behind by, you know, a lot of the things that wiped out other native populations.
Mm-hmm.
But for the Mego, you know, who knows why they're not interested in zapping us. Maybe they've got an agreement with Nyarlathotep. They bring him up. Nyarlathotep seems to like screwing with us.
Yeah.
You know? So maybe, you know, all glories and, you know, obeisances to the mighty messenger, you know. We promise not to break your favorite toys.
Yeah, I was thinking it's like, you know, it's something like, don't mess with my with my cosmic TV, you guys.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's either that or he just all he's got is the dancing around the court of Azathoth to the piping and drumming of madness. You know, that could get a little old.
Yeah.
If you are Nyarlathotep. So, you know, who knows what the relationship is, but I think that they are vulnerable.
Cool. Well, Scott, I just want to thank you for coming on the show and talking Mego and Delta Green and all kinds of mythosy things. And I hope to have you on in the future again to talk about all that kind of fun stuff.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
We'll come back, talk mythos anytime.
Okay, cool.
so. That was a lot.
That's wow. I hope
was
everyone made it
great.
through this episode.
Well, I have to say, like, it's some fun rants and
Yeah.
some fun conversations, and
Yeah.
it feels so nice to be able to listen to them.
Yeah, no, and it's so many different perspectives on so many different things. Everything from Fritz Lang to oh man, to the Mego to oh geez, I'm totally drawing a blank on stuff
Well,
right
we also
now.
talked about Yuggoth, right?
Yeah, we definitely talked about Yuggoth.
Yeah, well, I say I'm actually just in this part of this episode.
Yeah.
But I'll be back talking about monsters with DB some other time.
Sure. And check out that song that Rodney was talking about on Pretty Music for Pretty People. And then there's also the Monks of Monk Hall and the Monk. And he's going to recommend it. I'm going to recommend it. I think every one of our guests today is going to recommend that you check out The King in Yellow. Mm-hmm. And also his recommendation for an author to talk to or check out was Donald Bartholomew. There's so much more stuff that you should just check out in the show notes if you want to find out anything else that we talked about. And remember to keep it squiggly.
And stay weird.
Special thanks again to David Heath, Zack Ferguson,
Adam Scott Glancy, and Rodney Anonymous.
Check out the show notes to learn more about topics from this episode.
Edited by Daniel Spitzer. In-studio audio by Sara and Daniel Spitzer. Dave's Corner is by David Heath. Dave's Corner of the Universe.wordpress.com.
Music by Kevin MacLeod. Help the show by sharing, rating, liking, or 5-star giving wherever you listen to or rate podcasts.
That really does help us.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Want the show to be twice a month? Support the show by hitting the Patreon button on PGttCM.podbean.com or by going to paypal.me/PGttCM. Buy a cool shirt from PGttCM.threadless.com. PGttCM is part of the Dark Myths Collective.
And don't forget to visit PGttCM.com and check out our new podcast, Welcome to Portland, and find out how you can be a guest. Recorded at Badger's Drift Studio in beautiful North Portland.
Recorded at Badger Drift Studio in beautiful North Portland.
Recorded at Badger's Drift Studio in beautiful North Portland.
Recorded at Badger Drift Studio in beautiful North Portland. Recorded at